Has this happened to you? You're smart and you're passionate and you know something because you've clocked your 10,000 hours in it. Something you really love, like say music or sport or photography, and there's someone who needs help on the internet. So you help them. You craft the perfect post and they reply, "Lol dude, if I wanted AI, I'd ask ChatGPT." And you're annoyed. Sure. I mean, come on, AI. But why does it happen? Because yes, we're all drowning in AI slop. Google serves us up dumb answers every time we search for something. But that's not it, because your answer was good. So why do dumb people think your smart answer was AI? I have a theory, and the Dunning-Kruger effect is involved, sure, but it's so much more than that. Is it because people are stupid and they hate you? Oh no, it's much worse than that. Because you've just met the most dangerous, annoying philosophical villain ever. It's evil Socrates. And I think there's also a powerful lesson that we can learn from it, because we can't stop dumb people from commenting on our posts, but we might just be able to change our lives with the lesson they accidentally give us. Stay tuned and find out. So, why do dumb people think that smart people like you are AI? Let's talk briefly about the psychological reasons they might think you're AI, and then we'll get into the deeper philosophical reasons. You might have heard of the groundbreaking psychological research that established the Dunning-Kruger effect. It was first laid out by the psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999, and it's gone on to worldwide fame due to the fact that their discovery explains practically the whole internet, or at least the parts of it that frustrate us the most. The Dunning-Kruger effect claims that the scope of people's ignorance is often invisible to them. And when people have no idea of how much they don't know about something, they tend to overestimate how good they are at it, because they literally lack the information they need to recognize how terrible they are. And Dunning-Kruger further established that the more you know about something, in effect, the more of an expert you are, the less confident you tend to be. Because now you have a very clear idea of not only how much you still have to learn in your passion of choice, but also the time it takes and the effort to build up the expertise and skill in those areas. For example, there's one man who truly embodies this effect in action, and his name is Michael Scott. But there's also one phrase that to me embodies the totality of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it should prompt you to go to DEFCON 1 warning sirens anytime you hear it. That phrase is,
"So how hard can it be?"
Because it usually leads to... Yes. How hard can it be sums up the Dunning-Kruger effect in one phrase, because we don't know what we don't know. And that leads us to be overconfident in our chances of doing it. And I say we, because we've all used that phrase at some point in our lives, admit it, and we've all bitten off a little more than we can chew, taken on a task that took way longer and was way more complicated, only to have a knowledgeable friend say, "Oh yeah, there's a lot that goes into putting together your own sentient robot." But when dumb people call smart people AI, it isn't just their oversimplification and lack of knowledge that annoys us. There's a few more steps, some of which are unique to the state of the internet today. So, let's imagine that journey through ignorance, denial, and the accusation that somebody is AI. And the psychological defense mechanisms that the dumb person is using when they reply to your post. Let's place ourselves in their shoes. Because, spoiler alert, we've all been the dumb person at some point. First, there's step 1, ignorance. Now, few of us actually think that we're dumb, even when all of us are incredibly dumb at some things. And if you're the kind of person that's incredibly humble about everything, then congratulations. You're more evolved than the rest of humanity, and you're probably the only one. The rest of us have our blind spots. And as we've seen from Dunning-Kruger, the dumbest people often think they're the smartest. We don't know what we don't know. We're all a little ignorant about something, which leads us to step 2, unwelcome enlightenment. When we ask a question online and some kind, knowledgeable person responds, and we glimpse the abyss. the depths of just how much we don't know about something and how difficult it's going to be to learn it properly. And we recoil in shock, like the main character in a Lovecraft story. And we say to ourselves, no, it can't be this complicated and impossible to learn. Which leads us to step 3, an absolute classic of the genre, denial. Having glimpsed the mere outer shadow of Cthulhu, we decide, no, this is not a way to live. And thank goodness the psychic defense mechanisms kick in. We think it can't be that complicated. And we think typical eggheads, always overcomplicating things. And we think surely there's a simple answer. There always is. I don't need to waste my life learning about stuff. I just need to get back to death scrolling on TikTok. Sorry, I mean doom scrolling YouTube shorts. So we land on step 4, delusion. Particularly the self-delusion that, it's not that hard. I know what I'm doing. That expert's full of crap, just overcomplicating things for the sake of it, probably even in their vested interest, making things look more complicated than they are. So we always have to go crawling back to them for advice. Aha, I'm onto them. I mean, how hard could it be? And then we arrive at our destination. Step 5, accusation. When suddenly an easy but wrong answer might be the most comfortable for us to accept and require the least effort. Because that poor expert might be still trying to help us, bless them, despite the fact that we've glimpsed the abyss and recoiled and figured that they're just making it harder and more complicated than they should. And actually, we might be the geniuses that take a simple common sense approach and cut through all the bullcrap. And we notice that the expert posting on this forum has been unusually nice for the internet and patient, and hasn't accused us of anything at all, just been helpful. In fact, they've produced those answers really fast. Like, not a normal dumb person posting on the internet miscommunicating fast, but like really fast. Like AI fast, and with an AI level of detail and an AI level of niceness and helpfulness. My God, they must be AI. Just cutting and pasting AI responses to our questions between doom scrolling Instagram like the rest of us. I mean YouTube shorts. And so we type, lol dude, if I wanted AI, I'd ask chatgpt. So that might explain how we get accused of being AI. But what does it mean? What's the underlying philosophy that's at work here? What kinds of systems or approaches to the world are the dumb people trapped in when they respond in this way? And this is where we meet evil Socrates. Or at least that's what I call him, because he's the mirror image of the historical good philosopher, Socrates. And Socrates is famous because he was just asking questions and did his own research. Not in the malicious or ideologically motivated way that, say, some public figures might, but because he knew that he didn't know something and genuinely wanted to understand. Indeed, the oracle at Delphi, which was the source of wisdom and prophecy in ancient Greece, famously called him the wisest man in Athens because he knew that he knew nothing. And Socrates knew a ton. He was a well-respected philosopher and thinker in the ancient world, but he also knew the limits of his knowledge and how much of the world fell outside of it. He was always conscious of what he didn't know and joyfully sought out every opportunity to learn more. So for me, evil Socrates is the dumb person on the internet that not only doesn't know the limits of their knowledge, but thinks that they are basically smart and that they already know almost everything they do need to know. They're comfortable, they're lazy, they're uncurious, and they're convinced that anything they know or they think must be right because they're the ones that knew it and thought it. They think that there is nothing meaningful outside the limits of their own knowledge. And if they're uncurious and never bother to learn anything new, then the bounds and the limits of their knowledge are likely to be pretty small. And when they're confronted with anything outside of those bounds, they are challenged. And they respond with some of the steps we talked about. Ultimately, they don't want to have those limits of knowledge stretched, because then they would have to confront how much is outside of them. But there are two philosophical ideas, or rather contexts, that enable evil Socrates and are very important to talk about. These are cynicism and relativism. And on the internet, they're everywhere. Socrates himself was familiar with cynicism. It was a school of philosophy that existed before him in ancient Greece and went on to have a long life after him. It went on pretty much to the advent of what we would call Stoicism. The Cynics were philosophers who rejected everything they did not discover for themselves. They relied on no one and nothing. They often spent their lives in poverty, inquiring into things for themselves. Their mantra practically was, do your own research and reach your own conclusions. But they were also not too far from Socrates, in that they were at least inquisitive and tried to do that research. The ancient Greek cynics were interesting because they were engaged in constant debate and philosophical practice to reach their conclusions. And unlike our dumb poster, they did at least put in the work to expand the limits of their own knowledge. And at its beginnings, cynicism was a philosophy of self-denial, saying no to fame, to money, to the praise of others, to anything that didn't come from within and required a dependence on others. Be humble, in other words. But there's a problem with cynicism, because no person is an island. We live in communities and we rely on others. And today, our world is much more complex than that of the ancient Greeks, where constant learning and investigation might actually allow one person to reach the limits of human knowledge at that time. Today, no one person can know anything, except for Philibot, of course. We can't all do our own research because, for example, it takes decades of learning and thinking and knowledge and resources of a university faculty to investigate, say, even the smaller points of macroeconomics. And even when the most well-meaning sources of knowledge can make mistakes, there's always the danger of being wrong. Even for the ancients, cynicism gave rise to the problem of living in a world that was unreliable and changing. In fact, it was the ancient Stoics who did believe in truth and in virtue that made a lot of the actual successful philosophical attempts to solve the cynics' problems. Cynicism today is different, though. Cynicism today is the attitude that no one knows anything, that there's no such thing as social or ethical values, that people just do what they want, and there's no point helping anyone or being involved with anything. For our dumb poster, it creates the environment of suspicion and resentment towards the expert. The dumb poster assumes they don't actually mean to help, that they have ulterior motives, and that you can't trust them. They assume that the correct response to any offer to help is to be negative and to take them down or do what you can to expose them as a cynic themselves, which then matches and justifies the cynicism of the dumb poster. At least that's how our cynical dumb poster might reason. But there's a second philosophical context of the problem that might help them, and it's called relativism. This is a much more modern idea that there is no truth, and that one answer is just as good as another. And it has a close relative, excuse the pun, called nihilism, which is the further claim that nothing means anything and nothing matters. At this point, we could go into the work of Friedrich Nietzsche, and we have briefly in another video on the death of God and postmodern critiques of established authority and knowledge. But we don't need to do that quite for this. It's just worth noting that the philosophers in this camp are often misread. Almost all of them still believed in truth of some sort. After all, that's why many of them became philosophers in the first place, the search for truth. But they were extremely wary of the uses to which claims of knowledge and truth are put. And a lot of their work highlighted how some useful truths are put to work by social and political forces or systems, while other inconvenient truths are often ignored or buried. Relativism and its place in internet culture is slightly different. It tells the dumb person that they don't have to know anything, really, because everything's the same, and one thing is just as true or as false as another. The philosopher and the expert, according to the relativist, they've wasted their time trying to figure out the right way or the better approach or the truth, because that doesn't exist. They're just overcomplicating things when any approach or claim will do. And the dumb poster can conclude that they don't need to know stuff, because it doesn't matter. I mean, how hard can it be? The dumb poster doesn't have to put in the effort to find out and know, so thank goodness they didn't. That's what they think. And the smart person who just replied to correcting them doesn't matter. They're wrong, because nothing is right and nothing matters. Really, the smart person is the fool under relativism. And then there's a further assumption that the dumb poster makes, a kind of mirroring fallacy. Because the existence of the expert or the smart person challenges the philosophical position of the dumb poster, that of relativism and cynicism, and the dumb poster needs to resolve that challenge and that contradiction. And they'll frequently make an assumption. They'll make an assumption that the perceived smart person or expert is just as dumb and unknowledgeable as the dumb poster is, that they're just as uninterested in doom-scrolling Facebook, YouTube Shorts, as the dumb poster is. So how did this expert come up with such a seemingly thoughtful and nuanced post? Must be AI. And that's why, both psychologically and philosophically, dumb people on the internet think you're AI. But what can we learn from it? The first lesson is straight from the Stoics. You can't control what dumb people do. They're going to comment on your posts. They're going to occasionally accuse you of being AI. There's nothing you can do about it. The Stoics would say, don't just accept that, expect that. Or, to quote Mel Brooks,
Hope for the best. Hope for the best. Expect the worst. Expect the worst. You could be Tolstoy or Fanny Hurst. So take your chances. There are no answers. Hope for the best. Expect the worst.
but also don't let that stop you from helping people or from speaking up. Because for every dumb poster, there's almost certainly a dozen other people reading who are interested in what you have to say and who might actually be helped by it. You may not hear from them, because sometimes we only hear from the worst people, but that doesn't mean they're not there. Instead, maybe just tune out the dum-dums, or even smile and have a good laugh when they turn up like clockwork. Seneca certainly would have. The second lesson is, don't be a dum-dum yourself. Because we all are, sometimes. But we can know that about ourselves. We can be forewarned. And like Socrates, we can make an effort to learn. It's not as hard or as exhausting as it seems. In other words, physician, heal thyself. Don't be an evil Socrates, be a good Socrates. The world is so much more fun when we acknowledge that we know nothing. Because that's not all that Socrates did. Instead, he walked around the centre of town and he talked to people. He gathered together experts, opinions, different perspectives, and after every conversation, he walked away with a better understanding. And he got to meet interesting people along the way because, remember, we're all dumb people. We all have stuff that we're bad at. We've all had the thought of, how hard can it be? Or it isn't complicated, or, sounds like AI. That's maybe because we're swimming in complexity and in AI slop. But it's also because in a complicated world, we have to confront just how much we don't know every single day. But we should confront that lack of knowledge with joy, like Socrates did. It's an opportunity to learn something new. And by engaging with someone who is knowledgeable or passionate about a topic they're an expert on, we can make learning something new fun. And perhaps we can make a friend along the way too, which is handy if they know a lot about how to reprogram a filler bot so he doesn't force me to constantly promote YouTube Shorts. Anyway, back to doom scrolling Reddit.